Thank you so much, Isabel. Feeling a little bit unskilled already because all I've got is words to share with you, and having had music and film and image, I think it really brings into focus how useless words are. Really, when you're trying to capture something as broad as the topic of today. We've all had a bit of like a personal story before our bit, so I wasn't planning to do this, but maybe I should just say a little bit about how I became interested in the interface between spirituality and psychosis. I was living when I was 18 in London, and my best friend, my flatmate, developed another messiah. He became the messiah in my flat at the age of 18, and really quite a sort of up and down time. A lot of our friends were like, "God, he's mad, let's just get him somewhere." Some of our friends were like really sucked in because he's very convincing, very persuasive, very intelligent guy. So some of them were like sort of becoming his disciples, and I was like, "Shit, which way do I go?" He made me one of his disciples, so I must have given an inkling of being more on this side, listening a bit more. I thought the problems he was trying to solve were really important problems about the world and about happiness and global peace. I thought, wow, this is an important problem to be solving. But the solutions were a little bit dodgy that he was coming up with. Having to build an ark and blow it up. So I was kind of in the middle a little bit. But then 5 years later from there, after a psychology degree in London, I then signed on to a master's in psychology of religion. I didn't really get much out of the psychology degree that I was interested in. I was a bit disappointed. It was all about stats and graphs and things, a psychology degree. I was like, what? Psychology? So I then studied a master's in psychology of religion. And 5 years later, I had this kind of, my week was made up of, during the day, I was working in a psychosis service, early intervention service, talking to people with psychotic experiences, and then I was doing this master's in the evenings, learning about mystical experience and William James and Carl Jung and Groff and some of the people we've talked about today. I was learning about mystical experience and Alistair Hardy. So I had this, and I still just kind of wasn't really clear in my head how to balance this all together, but I was being exposed to both sides, and so I've always had this interest of kind of bringing these two worlds together. I think one of the main things I'd like to start is I really strongly believe and have faith in the brain's, the mind's natural healing processes, the mind's capacity to solve problems, the mind's natural capacity to adapt to environments. And in the same way that a mind can adapt to a very threatening environment by setting up its defenses and protecting and dissociating, maybe even hallucinating, the mind will also respond to very warm, caring, nurturing environments. In those conditions of warmth, caring, connection, the mind will respond and will be able to work optimally at problem solving and self-healing, and resolving existential concerns and unresolved emotional concerns. So I guess that's where I wanted to start, just really having faith in the mind's natural healing process. So our job, I am a therapist, I'm a clinical psychologist as well as a researcher. Our job is, I think, as the people who want to help people with psychosis, our job is not to come in and try and fix it and change it, to try and, because we think it should be a bit more like that. Our job is to create the conditions and environments around that person so that their brain can resolve itself. So it sort of, it changes the whole focus, and I think over the last 100 years or whatever, we've been doing very much the reaching in, trying to change things. So, as a scientist, as a scientist, I think our job is not to develop fancy techniques and put all our money into clever new technology that's going to fix this thing once and for all. Our job is actually to try and understand the importance of social context, understand the biopsychosocial narrative of how we can create these conditions around someone for them to do their own problem solving, for them to do their own relating to their experiences, relating to their own anomalous experiences and integrating them into their life. So rather than me thinking science is boo, 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 hiss, I think science can be very, very useful here. But it's slightly different. It's not trying to explain the experiences with science. It's trying to use science to create the conditions around people and in social networks, and to develop a really strong evidence base for the importance of what we all know is the bleeding obvious. We know that social connection is what helps people, but we've made a terrible, terrible job at proving that scientifically, because all the important ingredients of therapy, as therapists we know, things like the relationship, these are the things that are getting cut out of from the, as we move forward. Where I'm from in London, our therapies for people with psychosis are just getting cut. They're becoming more mechanistic, more manualized. CBT is one example. Something that's becoming quite manualized. And to be honest, I think we're just taking ourselves further away from the important things, which is human connection, as we've seen very well illustrated by Phil and others today. So I want to use science as a friend to help bring us back closer to what's important. Okay. So I've got a few slides to show. Typical of the scientists that are all working perfectly now. Right, so here we go. So this is just some research that I've been involved with, where we've been recruiting people who have anomalous experiences but have not come into contact with mental health services. So I want to just race through some of the studies that have been looking at this question and the implications for how we can take this forward as research, but also as interventions, and how we can. And the implications, obviously, are very much within communities and families and networks and societies as well. So this is just a study, a qualitative study, where we took 6 participants who were receiving treatment for psychosis, and 6 participants who had very similar experiences but had never come into contact with services. And actually, not only were they living peacefully alongside their experiences, they were also reporting positive benefits of their experiences as well. So I was interested in what are the sort of differences between these two groups, and what are the protective factors, what are the vulnerability factors, are there things in the social context, are there things in the lead up that might have been different. So I used the interviews to really get them to talk about their first experience and what was going on in their life at that time. So the experiences themselves, as you can see, are very similar. So the findings were that there were lots of group similarities between the clinical and non-clinical in how the immediate situational context, so what the context in which these experiences came about. Both groups reported that there was some negative emotion, often accompanied by isolation and contemplation about the meaning and direction of life. Also similar in both groups were that the experiences themselves provided some initial emotional fulfillment, to some kind of existential concern, or some kind of insight into something that did feel initially quite, revelatory or quite positive, or seemed to, this is similar to Isabel was saying before about problem-solving hypothesis. Even though obviously in the non-clinical group, in the clinical group, there was nothing positive about the situation later on. I must say that these are all people whose first experience started within the last 5 years. That was an inclusion criteria, because I didn't want people, going too far back. So we really wanted to try and capture what was going on in your life. And the insights in both groups were meaningful in the context of the emotional concerns at the time, across the board. And similarly, in both groups, there was a similar sort of subjective experience as well. Breakdown of ego boundaries and developing new conceptual outlooks. So across the whole group, 12 participants. Where the differences started appearing between the groups was more that in the sort of context. So some intellectual context, but also, most importantly, social context. So the non-clinical group reported more prior conceptual knowledge. So this is, for instance, some of the participants were saying, oh yeah, well as a family, we always talked about ghosts and we always talked about spirits and this kind of thing growing up. So it was there was a kind of framework to make sense of experiences within already. There was some sense that existed. But even more importantly, and more strikingly differentiating the groups was this interpersonal aspect, receiving validation and acceptance from others. There were some other findings as well, because I'm going to focus on this particular finding for this talk, but there are other findings as well about non-clinical group, more perceived desirability and transiency. This is a process, a transient process that I'm in, rather than a permanent state, because that's quite scary. And also, the clinical group reported less appraisal options, so there were less options to try and make sense of it. In the non-clinical group, there were some of the participants like, oh, well, it could have been this, it could have been the, it could have been the lack of sleep, it could have been the, the trauma, it could have been the drugs I've been taking, or, there were a menu of interpretation, so there was less urgency to kind of reach a conclusion. In the clinical group, there seemed to be, just take the first thing, which often is what the doctor gives to me. As my conclusion. So the interpersonal context findings, this is just a couple of quotes. So this is Holly, who is a clinical, so she was in psychosis services. She said, I relayed this experience to psychiatrists in the hospital, sent for EEG tests, was told that I was hallucinating. This guy just didn't listen, just obviously hadn't heard anything really that I'd said. I just felt that this really positive experience was just scrutinised and just like mocked. I didn't feel offended, I just thought they were being really stupid and disregarding of this kind of, really important thing. So something that was important to her, just when she started talking about it, she was met with these really sort of cold faces and like not listening faces and just thinking about emotionally what happens in that moment. So someone's really, really, God, this is like really important. I'm trying to solve my family's concerns, or I'm receiving these messages that mean this is what it's all about, and then suddenly getting these kind of blank, concerned looks from people who shove you under a scanner, and emotionally, suddenly, that shift between fulfillment to threat, that suddenly everything sort of drops, and then a sort of process starts from there. So I'm sort of adding my own ad-libs to the data, and so let's remember this is the data here. Compare this to Clive, who said, somebody came up to me and said, well, we really need to hear from you, that's a very powerful message, and they need to hear that message. And he said that really mattered to him. Daniel said he needed affirmation, that's what he needed, to help me contextualize it and make sense of it. I needed affirmation from other people that it was all okay. So something about the social experience, the validation from others that can help, if that feels safe, that creates a sense of safeness to start exploring these experiences. There are numbers to back this up as well, if you're interested. And so there's something about social safeness that I'm really interested in. This is really like the sort of focus of my research now. So social safeness experience, I mean, this is so obvious, obviously, but you need to prove it scientifically for anyone to listen. Social safeness experience, something about that reducing emotional distress, but also improving the chances of integrating cognitively this experience. So as a scientist, I think the important thing here is developing a language that can be shared across the professions. Okay, so if we understood that social safeness is important, what can we do biologically? What can we do socially? What can we do psychologically to try and tap that same mechanism, really? Because then if we can all kind of come from the same place, the things we're trying to target, essentially creating a context or conditions around a person for them to do their own problem solving, then I think we need the science to give people these roles. Because obviously it's not happening intuitively because of the humane reason to do that. So the good news is that there is already a lot of science out there. Now, this is a horrible title for a paper. I mean, I'm not even going to read it because it just, well, I'll collapse by the end of it. But basically, what it's saying is that social relationships are important. And this is a review paper, so if you actually, I know not many of you rush away and read this, but if you actually read it, there's lots and lots of studies in there with certain facial muscles, facial expressions, body postures, voice tones. This is built in as well. So, if you imagine like the sort of caveman coming back from hunting to the pack, and the caveman sees his fellow tribesmen with a sort of smile on their face, that signals to him that environment is safe. So he immediately has a calming down effect. So these little facial expressions over many millions of years would have become wired up to activate our soothing safeness system. Which is why, a very obvious implication, therefore, is as people who are working in psychiatric units, if we just smiled, really, we're immediately activating the threat regulating system, bringing someone down so that their brain, their mind can start operating and integrating anomalous experiences, working out for themselves. So in the therapy that I do, which is called compassion-focused therapy, we do a lot of practice with this with individuals. I practice body posture, voice tones, facial expressions, because we're trying to activate their soothing system, their built-in soothing system. Oh, that's nice. Speaking of soothing systems, I should have had something on there. Oh, here we go. Okay, so this is just to show how this is happening in the mind. So the soothing system, which is linked to the attachment system in our relationships and affiliative connections, calms the threat system down. And this can be activated in the context of self-to-self relationships. So how the relationship we have with ourself, self and other relationships, and of course, for today, self and the relationship with the whole and the spiritual world, nature, all these relationships, all these sense of connections, all this sense of connectedness and safeness in the context of an affiliative bond, this calms the threat system down. And we've got already a very good scientific evidence base for this. We've just got to translate it into the mental health services and give people roles to do that. So this is now where I'm up to with my research, and I was hoping to present some data from the current study, but there's been a bit of a delay because I I had a Dutch student working for me, and so obviously keeping to time was a problem. No, nothing to do with that. I couldn't present any findings yet, but I'll tell you where we're up to. So basically, I'm looking at the kind of I'm looking at developing transpersonal experiences questionnaire, which is a questionnaire for the general population in understanding, measuring transpersonal phenomena. And so I have actually collected all this data. 290 people have completed that, and then I've also retested people 6 months later, looking at whether their social environments between the first time and the second time, T1 and T2, whether the social experience of safeness versus social experience of threat influences these transpersonal experiences. So basically whether their relationships have an influence on their internal relationships with their experiences and how distressing they are as well. So that's a big study that I will be writing up. And then this is the one I wanted to share with you a bit more today if I had a bit more data, but because the whole SciMate ESM technology was all developed here in the Netherlands, and it's a really great way of capturing just moment-to-moment experiences of how people's social worlds and social feelings socially interact with their anomalous experiences, and how these interact with their emotional experiences as well. So I'm kind of looking at that kind of those interactions of social, emotional, and anomalous experience, and trying to see how that changes throughout the day. And I've got one clinical group doing that with these devices in their pockets, and I've got one non-clinical group who have anomalous experiences, and so I'll have some data very, very soon. I just need to get this student back on board. And then the third study, which I haven't started yet, but this is going to be with the Spiritual Crisis Network, which Isabel, I think, mentioned briefly today. So in this study, I'm trying to see, this is people who are non-clinical, so they're not seeking help in clinical services, and they have anomalous experiences, but they are also in crisis as well. So they're not just happy, enjoying their life. They are having real difficulty with some of their experiences, but not in a medical framework, or not seeking help from the medical profession. Or maybe they've gone in and thought, nah, not for me, I'll come and seek it elsewhere. So I'm really interested in whether the experience of social safeness can be cultivated outside of the system, within networks and the communities, and whether that has a positive influence on distress in relation to experiences. There's an important, the therapy, this is the last thing I'll say, that there's a therapy that maps on to this research, which is compassion-focused therapy. So I'm also currently evaluating whether compassion-focused therapy is an effective intervention for people with psychosis. And basically, if we develop compassionate motives and mental states, this supports the physiology of safeness and feeling socially connected. And equally, the physiology of social safeness supports developing compassion, the kind of mental states like empathy and mentalizing that are conducive for compassion. So the final thing I just want to say is, let's try and, we can be angry at the scientists and the psychiatrists and stuff, but I think most importantly, let's try and engage them all, giving them a role in working towards what we know is helpful. And rather than starting to isolate professions and people who have their heads stuck in computers all day, let's engage them, because they can have very important roles. So thank you very much.